Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll be reading a series of short paragraphs to help you practice and improve your English listening skills. Listening carefully and repeating after me is one of the best ways to build fluency, pronunciation, and confidence in English. So relax, listen closely, and try to follow along. Let's start with first paragraph. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the serene lake, its ripples reflecting the fading light like a canvas of liquid amber. Emily sat on the wooden dock, her bare feet dangling just above the cool water, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had always found solace in nature, a quiet escape from the chaos of her daily life. As a young journalist in a bustling city, her days were filled with deadlines, interviews, and the constant hum of urban energy. Yet here, in this tranquil corner of the world, she could breathe, reflect, and reconnect with herself. The air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of childhood summers spent exploring forests and chasing fireflies. Those memories felt distant now, buried under the weight of adult responsibilities. But moments like this brought them rushing back, vivid and alive. Emily's journey to this peaceful retreat hadn't been planned. Just a week ago, she'd been staring at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unable to string together a single coherent sentence. Writer's block, her editor called it, but to Emily it felt like a betrayal of her own mind. She had always prided herself on her ability to weave stories, to capture the essence of a moment in words that danced off the page. But lately, her words felt heavy, uninspired, as if they were trapped in a fog she couldn't navigate. Frustrated, she'd packed a small bag, hopped into her car, and driven to this lakeside cabin, a place her grandmother had left her years ago. It was a modest structure, with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, but it held a charm that felt like home. As she sat by the lake, Emily pulled out her notebook, its pages worn and slightly yellowed from years of use. She hadn't written anything substantial in weeks, but something about the stillness of this place urged her to try again. She began with simple observations, the way the water lapped gently against the dock, the distant call of a loon, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Slowly, her pen moved with more confidence, the words flowing like the stream that fed the lake. She wrote about her fears, of failing as a writer, of losing the spark that had once defined her. She wrote about her dreams, too, of telling stories that mattered, of touching hearts with her words. The act of writing felt like rediscovery. Each sentence was a step toward reclaiming a part of herself she thought was lost. Emily realized that her struggle wasn't just about finding the right words, it was about finding herself again. The city, with its relentless pace, had drowned out her inner voice. But here, surrounded by nature's quiet wisdom, she could hear it once more. She thought about the people she'd interviewed over the years, ordinary individuals with extraordinary stories. There was the baker who'd started his business with nothing but a single recipe and a dream. The teacher who'd transformed her classroom into a haven for creativity. The elderly couple who danced together every evening for 50 years. Their stories had inspired her, yet she had forgotten how to draw inspiration from her own life. As the stars began to speckle the sky, Emily closed her notebook, a small smile tugging at her lips. The weight of her doubts hadn't vanished entirely, but it felt lighter, more manageable. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging. Writing always was, but she also knew she had the strength to face it. The lake, the cabin, the memories, they were all reminders that creativity wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was a spark that needed space to breathe, to grow, to flicker into a flame. Emily stood, stretching her arms toward the starlit sky, and made a silent promise to herself. She would keep writing, keep searching, keep listening to the quiet voice within. Tomorrow she'd return to the city, but she'd carry this moment with her, a touchstone for when the world grew too loud again. Let's jump to next paragraph. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills, weaving through the tall grasses like a gentle whisper from the earth itself. Clara stood at the edge of the meadow, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air, her eyes tracing the delicate outlines of dew-kissed wildflowers. She had come to this quiet countryside to escape the suffocating rhythm of her life in the city, where the constant buzz of notifications, crowded subways, and endless meetings had left her feeling like a stranger to herself. At 28, Clara was a graphic designer, her days spent crafting vibrant visuals for clients who rarely appreciated the artistry behind her work. The pressure to produce, to meet deadlines, to stay relevant in a fast-paced industry had drained her creativity, leaving her with a nagging sense of emptiness. This retreat, a small cottage nestled in the heart of the countryside, was her attempt to rediscover the spark she'd lost, to reconnect with the world and with herself through the simple act of being present. The cottage was a quaint, weathered structure, its stone walls covered in ivy and its windows framed with chipped blue paint. It belonged to her aunt, a painter, who had spent years capturing the beauty of these hills on canvas. Clara had visited as a child, spending summers running through the meadows, sketching under the shade of ancient oaks, and listening to her aunt's stories of a life dedicated to art. Those memories felt like a distant dream now, blurred by the demands of adulthood. Yet, as she stepped inside the cottage, the familiar scent of old wood and lavender brought those days rushing back. She set her bag down and wandered through the rooms, her fingers brushing against the rough texture of the walls, each imperfection telling a story of its own. The simplicity of the space was a stark contrast to her sleek city apartment, and she found comfort in its unpretentious charm. Clara decided to spend her first day exploring the countryside, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She followed a winding path that led through the meadow and into a dense forest, where sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the ground. The air was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, a distant stream gurgling over smooth stones. She paused to sketch a cluster of mushrooms nestled at the base of a tree, their delicate caps glistening with morning dew. As her pencil moved across the page, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. There were no clients to please, no deadlines to meet, just her and the quiet beauty of the world around her. Each stroke of her pencil felt like a conversation with the forest, a way of capturing its essence without the pressure of perfection. As the day unfolded, Clara's thoughts began to wander beyond the sketches in her book. She thought about the choices that had led her to this moment, the decision to pursue a career in design, the sacrifices she'd made to climb the corporate ladder, the relationships she'd let slip away in the pursuit of success. She had always believed that hard work would bring fulfillment, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of why she loved creating in the first place. The joy of designing had been replaced by a relentless need to prove herself, to keep up with an industry that valued speed over substance. Sitting on a moss-covered rock, she wondered if she could find a way to balance her ambitions with the simple pleasures that once fueled her passion. By late afternoon, Clara reached the small clearing where a stream cut through the landscape, its waters clear and sparkling under the sun. She sat by its edge, dipping her fingers into the cool currents, and let her mind drift. She thought about the people she'd met over the years, artists, dreamers, and doers, who had inspired her with their resilience and creativity. There was the street musician who played his guitar with such passion that passers-by couldn't help but stop. The florist who arranged bouquets with the care of a poet crafting verses. The elderly librarian who shared stories of forgotten books with anyone who would listen. Their lives reminded her that creativity wasn't just about producing something tangible. It was about living with intention, finding beauty in the ordinary and sharing it with the world. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara returned to the cottage, her sketchbook filled with drawings and her heart a little lighter. She lit a fire in the small hearth, its crackling warmth filling the room, and sat down with a cup of tea. She opened her laptop, not to check emails or scroll through social media, but to write. She poured her thoughts onto the page, describing the meadow, the forest, the stream, and the quiet revelations they had sparked. The words came slowly at first, hesitant and unsure, but soon they flowed like the stream she'd sat beside, steady and unforced. She wrote about her fears of failing, her hopes of rediscovering her purpose, and her determination to carve out a life that felt true to who she was. The act of writing felt like a reclamation of her voice, a way to process the tangled emotions she carried for so long. Clara realized that her time in the countryside wasn't just about escaping the city. It was about rediscovering her own resilience. She didn't need to have all the answers now, but she could take small steps towards a life that felt more authentic. The countryside, with its endless beauty and quiet wisdom, had reminded her that creativity thrives in moments of stillness, in the spaces where she could listen to her own heart. As the firelight danced across the room, Clara made a promise to herself. She would carry this sense of peace back to the city, weaving it into her work and her life. She would create not just for others, but for herself, for the joy of it, for the simple act of bringing something new into the world. With her sketchbook by her side and the stars visible through the window, she felt ready to begin again. Let's jump to next paragraph. The first light of dawn crept over the rolling hills, painting the sky in delicate shades of pink and amber, as Elena stood at the edge of a sprawling vineyard, her breath visible in the cool morning air. At 30, she was a marketing analyst, her days consumed by spreadsheets, client calls, and the relentless pace of a corporate office in the heart of the city. The constant pressure to perform, to predict trends, and to meet targets had left her feeling like she was running on a treadmill that never stopped. This escape to the vineyard, a family-owned estate in a quiet valley, was her chance to step away from the noise, to rediscover the clarity and inspiration that had once fueled her dreams. The air was rich with the scent of ripening grapes and freshly turned earth, and the gentle hum of bees among the vines created a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. The vineyard belonged to her uncle, a jovial man who had spent his life tending to the vines and crafting wines that told stories of the land. Elena had visited as a teenager, helping with the harvest and listening to her uncle's tales of seasons past. But those memories had faded under the weight of adult responsibilities. Now, as she walked through the rows of grapevines, her fingers brushing against the waxy leaves, she felt a pull to reconnect with that younger, more curious version of herself. The estate was a patchwork of beauty, neat rows of vines stretching toward the horizon, a stone farmhouse with a red-tiled roof, and a wooden bench under an ancient olive tree, where she now settled with her sketchpad. She wasn't an artist by trade, but sketching had always been her way of processing the world, a habit she'd neglected in recent years. Elena began to draw, her pencil capturing the gentle curve of the vines, the texture of the soil, and the distant silhouette of the hills. The act was meditative, each stroke pulling her deeper into the moment. She thought about her career, how she'd chosen marketing for its promise of creativity, only to find herself trapped in a cycle of data and deadlines. The vineyard, with its slow, deliberate rhythm, reminded her of the importance of patience and care, qualities she'd once valued but had let slip away. As the sun climbed higher, warming her skin, she wrote in the margins of her sketchpad, jotting down thoughts about her life, her aspirations, and the nagging sense that she was meant for something more fulfilling. The morning unfolded slowly, giving Elena space to explore both the vineyard and her own mind. She wandered toward a small pond at the edge of the property where dragonflies skimmed the surface and reeds swayed in the breeze. Sitting on the grassy bank, she watched the water ripple, each movement a reminder of life's constant flux. She thought about the people who had shaped her. Her uncle, whose love for the land was infectious. Her high school art teacher, who had encouraged her to see the world through a creative lens. Her best friend, who always reminded her to take risks. Their influence lingered, urging her to reconsider her path. She began to imagine a life where her work felt more aligned with her passions, perhaps a role that blended marketing with storytelling, or even a leap into something entirely new, like starting her own creative venture. By midday, Elena joined her uncle in the winery, a cool, dimly lit building filled with the earthy scent of oak barrels. He showed her the process of pressing grapes, his hands steady and practiced, and shared stories of the vineyard's history, how it had survived droughts, wars, and changing times. His pride in the land was palpable, and it stirred something in Elena. She realized that her own work, though different, could carry the same sense of purpose if she infused it with meaning. She helped him label a batch of bottles, her fingers tracing the elegant script on the labels, and felt a spark of inspiration. What if she could create campaigns that told stories as rich and authentic as these wines? The idea felt like a seed, small but full of potential. As the afternoon waned, Elena returned to the bench under the olive tree, her sketch pad now filled with drawings and notes. She wrote about her desire to find balance, to work in a way that honored her creativity rather than stifling it. The vineyard had taught her that growth required time, care, and a willingness to adapt, lessons she could apply to her own life. She thought about the clients she'd worked with, some of whom ran small businesses with stories as compelling as her uncle's. Perhaps she could focus on helping them, using her skills to amplify their voices rather than chasing corporate accounts that left her uninspired. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the vines, Elena walked to the highest point of the vineyard, where a wooden swing hung from an old oak tree. She sat there, swaying gently, and watched the sky transform into a canvas of orange, purple, and gold. The beauty of the moment was overwhelming, a reminder that life was made of fleeting, precious instants. She pulled out her phone, not to check emails, but to take a photo of the sunset, capturing the way the light danced on the vines. The image wasn't for social media, it was for her, a keepsake of this moment of clarity. Back at the farmhouse, Elena lit a lantern and sat at the kitchen table, her sketch pad open before her. She wrote a letter to herself, a promise to hold on to the lessons of the vineyard, to prioritize creativity, to seek work that felt meaningful, and to make time for the things that brought her joy. The words flowed easily, each one a step toward reclaiming her sense of purpose. She knew the city would challenge her resolve, with its fast pace and endless demands. But she felt stronger now, grounded by the vineyard's quiet wisdom. As she closed her sketch pad and looked out at the starlit valley, Elena felt a quiet confidence settle within her. She was ready to return to her life, not as the same person who had left, but as someone ready to grow, to create, and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. Let's start with next paragraph. The golden rays of the afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of ancient trees, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Sophia trudged along the narrow trail, her backpack heavy with essentials, her hiking boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. At 35, she was a school teacher in a bustling metropolis. Her days consumed by lesson plans, grading papers, and managing a classroom full of energetic children. The endless cycle of early mornings and late nights had worn her down, leaving her feeling disconnected from the passion that had once drawn her to teaching. This solo hike into the mountains, to a remote cabin she'd rented for the weekend, was her way of seeking clarity, a stepping away from the noise to hear her own thoughts again. The air was crisp and pine-scented, carrying the faint chirp of birds and the distant rush of a stream, a symphony that soothed her frayed nerves. The cabin was a rustic log structure, perched on a hillside overlooking a valley dotted with wildflowers and evergreens. Sophia had discovered it through a friend's recommendation, a place where time seemed to stand still, far from the reach of cell signals and Wi-Fi. She unlocked the door with the key hidden under a flower pot, stepping into a space that smelled of wood smoke and earth. The interior was simple: a single room with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a wood-burning stove. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-worn volumes on nature, philosophy, and poetry. She dropped her backpack and opened the windows, letting the fresh mountain breeze sweep through, carrying away the remnants of her city stress. This was her sanctuary, a place to unwind and reflect without the constant interruptions of daily life. Sophia's journey into the mountains hadn't been impulsive. It was the culmination of months of feeling overwhelmed. She loved her students, their curiosity and laughter brightening even the toughest days. But the administrative burdens and parental expectations had overshadowed the joy of teaching. She found herself questioning her path, wondering if she was making a difference or just going through the motions. The mountains, with their timeless grandeur, seemed like the perfect backdrop for introspection. She laced up her boots again and set out on a trail that led to a nearby peak, her mind wandering as she climbed. The path was steep in places, challenging her physically, but each step felt like a release, a shedding of the invisible weights she carried. As she ascended, the landscape unfolded before her. Valleys stretching out like green carpets, rivers snaking through them like silver threads. She paused at a viewpoint, sitting on a flat rock to catch her breath, and pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. Sophia had always enjoyed journaling, but lately it had become sporadic, squeezed into rare quiet moments. Now, with the world spread out below her, she began to write. She described the majesty of the mountains, their peaks piercing the sky like ancient guardians, and the way the wind whispered secrets through the trees. Her words turned inward, exploring her doubts about her career, her fear of burnout, and her desire to inspire her students in meaningful ways. The act of writing in this setting felt transformative. Without the distractions of emails or lesson preparations, her thoughts flowed freely, revealing insights she hadn't considered before. She realized that her passion for teaching stemmed from a love of stories, sharing knowledge through narratives that sparked imagination. But in the grind of standardized tests and curricula, she lost sight of that. The mountains reminded her of the bigger picture, of how nature itself was a teacher, offering lessons in resilience, beauty, and change. She thought about incorporating more outdoor activities into her classes, perhaps field trips or nature-based projects, to reignite her students' wonder and her own enthusiasm. By midday, Sophia reached the summit, a rocky plateau with panoramic views that took her breath away. She unpacked a simple lunch, bread, cheese, and fruit, and ate while gazing at the horizon. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, casting shadows that danced across the land. In this solitude, she felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the environment, but to herself. She meditated for a while, focusing on her breath, letting go of the mental clutter that had accumulated over the years. Memories surfaced, her own childhood adventures in the woods near her family home, collecting leaves and imagining fairy tales. Those experiences had shaped her, fueling her decision to become a teacher. Yet adulthood had dulled that childlike wonder, replacing it with practicality and routine. Descending the trail, Sophia's steps were lighter, her mind clearer. She stopped by a stream, dipping her hands into the icy water, feeling its invigorating chill. She sketched a few wildflowers in her notebook, their delicate petals a contrast to the rugged terrain. The forest was alive with subtle movements. A squirrel scampering up a tree, birds flitting from branch to branch, the rustle of leaves on the breeze. Each observation became a metaphor for her life. The squirrel's agility reminding her to adapt, the bird's freedom urging her to let go of constraints. She wrote about these connections, her pen moving with renewed vigor, capturing the essence of her revelations. Back at the cabin, as the sun dipped lower, Sophia built a fire in the stove, its warmth spreading through the room. She brewed a pot of herbal tea and settled into a chair with one of the books from the shelf, a collection of essays on mindfulness and nature. The words resonated deeply, echoing her own experiences that day. She reflected on the people who had influenced her journey, mentors who had encouraged her creativity, students whose breakthroughs had reaffirmed her purpose, friends who had listened during tough times. Their stories intertwined with hers, forming a tapestry of support and inspiration. As night fell, stars emerged in the clear sky, a dazzling display unmarred by city lights. Sophia stepped outside, wrapping herself in a blanket, and lay on the grass to stargaze. The vastness of the universe put her worries into perspective, reminding her that life was a continuous journey of growth and discovery. She made mental notes of changes she wanted to implement, setting boundaries at work, incorporating more creative elements into her teaching, and planning regular escapes to nature. The mountains had given her a gift, not answers to all her questions, but the space to ask them and the courage to seek solutions. In the quiet of the night, Sophia returned to her notebook, writing by lantern light. She poured out her gratitude for this time away, her hopes for the future, and her commitment to nurturing her inner spark. The words filled pages, a testament to her rediscovered voice. She knew the return to the city would bring challenges, but she felt equipped to face them with fresh energy. The cabin, the trails, the mountains, they would remain a touchstone, a reminder that renewal was always possible, just a step away into the wild. As she drifted to sleep, the soft hoot of an owl lulled her, a final whisper from the forest that all was well. Let's start with next paragraph. The early morning air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Liam wandered along the coastal path, the rugged cliffs of the shoreline rising sharply against the churning gray sea. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the salty tang of the ocean, and he pulled a scarf tighter, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil with each step. At 32, Liam was a software developer, his life a blur of code, virtual meetings, and the soft glow of multiple screens that defined his days. The constant demands of his job had left him feeling like a cog in a machine, his creativity stifled by repetitive tasks and the pressure to deliver flawless results. This trip to the coast, to a small village where the world seemed to move at a slower pace, was his attempt to break free from the monotony, to rediscover the curiosity and wonder that had once driven him to create. The village was a cluster of stone cottages, their roofs mossy and weathered, nestled between rolling hills and the endless expanse of the sea. Liam had found the place by chance, scrolling through a travel blog late one night when sleep eluded him. The photos of windswept cliffs and quaint harbors had called to him, promising a respite from the sterile environment of his city apartment. He'd booked a small cottage for a week, packing little more than a few clothes, his laptop, and a worn journal he hadn't touched in years. As he arrived, the simplicity of the village struck him. There were no billboards, no crowded streets, just the rhythmic crash of waves and the occasional cry of a gull soaring overhead. It felt like stepping into a painting, where every detail was deliberate, every moment imbued with meaning. Liam's first morning was spent exploring the coastal path, a narrow trail that wound along the cliffs, offering breathtaking views of the ocean. He carried his journal, its pages blank except for a few scribbled ideas from years ago when he dreamed of building something truly innovative, a program that could blend art and technology in ways that felt alive. Those dreams had faded under the weight of corporate projects, but as he walked, the wild beauty of the coast stirred something within him. He stopped at a lookout point where the cliffs dropped sharply to the sea below and sat on a weathered bench. Opening his journal, he began to write, not code, but thoughts, fragmented at first, then flowing like the waves below. He described the way the sea seemed to breathe, its surface shifting with every gust of wind, and the way the clouds gathered like a chorus of silent observers. The act of writing felt unfamiliar, almost clumsy after years of typing lines of code, yet it was liberating, a way to untangle the thoughts that had been knotted in his mind. He wrote about his frustration with his job, where creativity was often sacrificed for efficiency, and his longing to build something that mattered. He thought about the early days of his career when he'd spent hours experimenting with new ideas, unafraid of failure. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that fearlessness, trading it for the security of a steady paycheck. The realization was humbling, but the vastness of the ocean before him made his worries feel smaller, more manageable. He wasn't here to solve everything, he reminded himself, but to listen, to the sea, to the wind, to the quiet voice within that he'd ignored for too long. As the day progressed, Liam wandered into the village where cobblestone streets wound past a small bakery, a pub with a faded sign, and a bookshop with a hand-painted window. He stepped into the bookshop, its shelves crammed with everything from classic novels to local histories. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes and a quick smile, greeted him warmly, recommending a collection of essays by a local writer who had spent years documenting the stories of the village's residents. Liam bought the book and settled into a corner of the pub with a cup of tea, flipping through its pages. The essays were vivid, filled with tales of fishermen braving stormy seas, of artists finding inspiration in the cliffs, of families passing down traditions through generations. Each story was a reminder that life was made of small, meaningful moments, not just grand achievements. Inspired, Liam returned to his journal, sketching ideas for a project that had been simmering in the back of his mind for years, a digital platform where people could share their stories, blending text, images, and interactive elements to create a living archive of human experiences. He imagined it as a space where creativity could thrive, where ordinary voices could be heard. The idea felt ambitious, almost daunting, but the village's quiet energy gave him the courage to dream again. He jotted down notes, diagrams, even snippets of code, letting his imagination run free without the constraints of deadlines or client expectations. For the first time in years, he felt like he was creating for himself, not for someone else's approval. As evening fell, Liam walked back to the cliffs, the sky now a tapestry of deep blues and purples, streaked with the last traces of sunlight. He sat on a rocky outcrop, watching the waves crash against the shore, their relentless rhythm a reminder of resilience. He thought about the people he'd read about in the book, their struggles, their triumphs, their quiet determination to live fully in the face of life's uncertainties. Their stories mirrored his own in some ways, a reminder that everyone faced moments of doubt and rediscovery. Liam realized that his time in the village wasn't just about escaping his routine. It was about rebuilding his connection to his own creativity, to the part of himself that thrived on curiosity and possibility. Back at the cottage, Liam lit a candle, its soft glow casting shadows on the walls. He opened his journal again, writing late into the night. He described the cliffs, the village, the people, and the spark they'd reignited in him. The words came easily now, each one a step toward clarity. He knew that returning to the city would bring challenges, the same pressures, the same demands, but he felt ready to face them with a renewed sense of purpose. He would carry the lessons of the coast with him, the importance of slowing down, of listening, of creating for the sake of creation. As he closed his journal and looked out at the starlit sky, Liam felt a quiet confidence settle within him. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time, guided by the spark he'd rediscovered in this wild, beautiful place. Let's jump to next paragraph. The gentle lapping of waves against the rocky shore filled the early morning air as Noah stood on a pebbled beach, the horizon stretching endlessly before him, painted in soft hues of peach and violet. At 29, he was a graphic novelist, his days typically spent hunched over a drawing tablet in his small city apartment, crafting intricate worlds of ink and imagination. The pressure to meet publisher deadlines and the constant hum of urban life had dulled his creative spark, leaving him grappling with a story that refused to come to life. This trip to a remote seaside village, where the ocean met jagged cliffs and quaint cottages dotted the coastline, was his attempt to break free from the mental fog, to rediscover the inspiration that had once flowed effortlessly. The salty breeze tugged at his jacket, carrying the faint cry of gulls and the earthy scent of seaweed, grounding him in the moment. The village was a cluster of weathered homes, their pastel facades softened by years of sea spray, nestled between rolling dunes and a winding coastal path. Noah had stumbled upon it through an online forum for artists seeking quiet retreats, its description promising solitude and natural beauty. He'd rented a tiny cottage overlooking the beach, packing only his sketchbook, a few pencils, and a battered copy of his favorite novel. As he settled in, the simplicity of the cottage struck him. Bare wooden floors, a single window framing the sea, and a small fireplace that crackled softly when lit. It was a stark contrast to his cluttered apartment, where notifications and noise competed for his attention. Here, the world felt slower, deliberate, inviting him to breathe deeply and listen to his thoughts. Noah began his day with a walk along the shore, his boots crunching over smooth pebbles and broken shells. The ocean was a living canvas, its surface shifting from calm to restless with each gust of wind. He stopped to sketch, his pencil capturing the curve of a wave, the jagged edge of a cliff, the fleeting shape of a cloud. The act was instinctive, unburdened by the need to produce something polished. He thought about his graphic novel, a story of a young adventurer navigating a fantastical world which had stalled halfway through its first draft. In the city, every line he drew felt forced. But here, surrounded by the sea's raw energy, ideas began to stir. He jotted notes in his sketchbook, fragments of dialogue and scenes inspired by the rhythm of the tides. As the sun climbed higher, Noah wandered into the village, where narrow streets were lined with small shops and a cafe exuding the aroma of fresh-baked bread. He entered the cafe, ordering a coffee and settling at a window table with the view of the harbor. The locals moved with a quiet ease, their conversations filled with tales of fishing trips and stormy nights. Noah listened, sketching their faces in his book, each wrinkle and smile a story of its own. He thought about the characters in his novel, realizing they lacked the depth he saw in these people. Their lives, shaped by the sea's unpredictability, reminded him that stories thrived on authenticity, on the messiness of human experience. He began to reimagine his protagonist, giving them flaws and dreams drawn from the resilience he observed around him. By midday, Noah followed a path to a lighthouse perched on the cliff, its white tower weathered but proud against the sky. He climbed its spiral staircase, the cool stone walls echoing his footsteps, and emerged onto a platform with a panoramic view of the ocean. The vastness was humbling, putting his creative struggles into perspective. He sat cross-legged, his sketchbook open, and drew the horizon, letting his mind wander. He thought about his journey as an artist, how he'd started drawing as a child, filling notebooks with fantastical creatures, driven by pure joy. That joy had been buried under deadlines and self-doubt, but the sea's endless expanse reminded him that creativity was a process, not a product. He wrote a letter to his younger self in the margins, promising to keep that joy alive no matter the challenges. In the afternoon, Noah followed a path to a lighthouse perched on a cliff, its white tower weathered but proud against the sky. He climbed its spiral staircase, the cool stone walls echoing his footsteps, and emerged onto a platform with a panoramic view of the ocean. The vastness was humbling, putting his creative struggles into perspective. He sat cross-legged, his sketchbook open, and drew the horizon, letting his mind wander. He thought about his journey as an artist, how he'd started drawing as a child, filling notebooks with fantastical creatures, driven by pure joy. That joy had been buried under deadlines and self-doubt, but the sea's endless expanse reminded him that creativity was a process, not a product. He wrote a letter to his younger self in the margins, promising to keep that joy alive no matter the challenges. In the afternoon, Noah explored a tidal pool, its shallow waters teeming with life, starfish clinging to rocks, crabs scrattling through algae, anemones swaying gently. He sketched the scene, marveling at the delicate balance of the ecosystem, a metaphor for his own need to balance work and passion. The village, with its quiet rhythms, was teaching him to slow down, to let ideas emerge naturally. He thought about the artists he admired, whose work felt alive because it was rooted in real experiences. He wanted his novel to feel that way, vivid, human, a story that resonated with readers because it came from a place of truth. As evening approached, Noah returned to the cottage, lighting the fireplace and spreading his sketches across the table. The pages were filled with images and notes, the curve of a wave, a fisherman's weathered hands, a lighthouse against a stormy sky. He began to weave these fragments into his story, seeing his characters take shape with new clarity. The adventurer in his novel was no longer a vague archetype, but a person with fears, hopes, and a connection to the world around them. The process felt like rediscovery, each sketch and sentence a step toward reclaiming his voice. Under the starlit sky, Noah stepped outside, the ocean's murmur a steady companion. He sat on a driftwood log, his sketchbook resting on his knees, and drew the constellations, their patterns sparking ideas for his story's mythology. The village had given him more than inspiration. It had reminded him that art was about connection, to places, to people, to oneself. He thought about his readers, imagining them finding solace in his story just as he'd found solace here. The weight of his creative block hadn't vanished, but it felt lighter, like a wave receding into the sea. Back inside, Noah wrote by firelight, his words flowing with the rhythm that matched the tides. He described the village, the ocean, and the quiet revelations they had brought. He made a promise to himself to carve out time for these moments of stillness, to create not just for deadlines, but for the love of storytelling. The city awaited, with its challenges and noise, but Noah felt ready to face it, carrying the sea's lessons in his heart. As he closed his sketchbook, the distant call of a gull echoed, a final note of encouragement from the wild, beautiful world.